This is the first town hall event that Senator Pocock is holding this year. We've been running these events for almost 2 years now, and they've been a fantastic way to hear firsthand from the community about what you care about. As always, the main purpose of these events is so that David can hear directly from you. So please don't hesitate to ask questions, throw your hands up. There's been a lot going on both in and outside of Parliament that David is really keen to update you on, as well as discussing what's coming next in the next few weeks. Related to that, we have a special guest speaker this evening. I'm going to fight an ongoing battle with this microphone, just so that you all know. David's a lot taller than me. So you're either going to hear him or you're going to hear me. Lucy Honan, who is the CEO of St Vincent de Paul Society Canberra Goulburn, is here to discuss the cost of living. But before we continue with the formal proceedings, I'd like to invite local Ngunnawal elder Selena Walker to say a few words.
Thank you. Yuma, Galaganya Jelena Walker, Darawa Nuna Darawa Nunawo. Hello, my name is Selena Walker and this is Ngunnawal Country. I want to first start by acknowledging my elders, the Ngunnawal elders, and pay respect to my elders past, present and future. I'd also like to acknowledge the recent passing of my grandmother, Auntie Agnes Shea. She was a little old black woman, but she did get around, so I'm sure many of you crossed paths with her. If you did, you're one of the lucky ones. I'd also like to acknowledge any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are with us here this evening. Welcome my brothers, sisters, aunts and uncles. And I'd like to extend that to all of our non-Indigenous friends that have joined us. Welcome. The Ngunnawal community are the traditional custodians of Canberra and the region. You may not be aware that the Ngunnawal nation is made up of several family groups and not just individuals who represent this country. Therefore, as a community, we have an elected body known as the United Ngunnawal Elders Council to represent us, along with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elected body of the ACT. This is important for you to understand and acknowledge, for our identity is a collective identity. There are other Indigenous and non-Indigenous people from around the nation, the country and the world who have come to live on Ngunnawal land. I'd like to acknowledge and welcome you all. The tradition of welcoming the people to country is a practice that was handed down by our ancestors, old people and elders from the beginning of time. Before entering another person's country, you would first announce your arrival and not enter until the traditional owner formally welcomed you. The reason for this practice was to protect your spirit whilst in another person's country and also to show respect for the country of which you are entering. It's wonderful to see that this practice is now recognised and respected. I suppose it's not like entering into someone's home unless you're first invited. The Ngunnawal people, as within all Aboriginal people, have a great heritage that we would like to share with all Australians from every walk of life. As you are aware, Canberra means meeting place. And Canberra has been a place of gathering for many Aboriginal tribes of Australia to come together to deal with important business and also for ceremonial purposes. Our Ngunnawal ancestors believed in the importance of people gathering to build relationships, share knowledge and to celebrate the gift of heritage and history. We believe it's important for all to recognise our unique history and to gain an understanding that our land is our heritage and how loss of the lands has disconnected so many Aboriginal people from their spiritual links, cultural heritage and identity. Reconciliation is not just a word, it's an action, and it's a human rights movement. As an Aboriginal person in this country, I've only been counted as a human being for 57 years. Let me repeat that while that sinks in. I, as a beautiful black woman in Australia, have only been counted as a human being for 57 years. I'm only 43. We are very young in our reconciliation journey here in Australia, but we're on the right path. By incorporating proper cultural protocols like welcome to country, acknowledgement of country, smoking ceremonies, etc., we are on the road to true reconciliation. It does hurt me though that my dad was born a tree, that my grandmother was a mother in this country before she was a human being. So I ask you all to take a moment and think about how old you are, how old your children are, and how old your elders are, and what you're doing to contribute to that reconciliation human rights movement. The referendum that happened last year was another huge milestone in our reconciliation journey. Not the result that we wanted, but it did bring a lot of truth-telling. Helped us to identify where we have to focus our efforts and what states need the most amount of help. I'm so proud to be a Canberran and I'm proud of my fellow Canberrans for the yes vote here in the ACT. It's a demonstration that the work that my grandmother done towards reconciliation, that I continue to do today, can influence that change that we all want. Every time I mention the word referendum, I see heads go down, I see people get fidgety and uncomfortable. We've got to stop this. It's a shared history, so there has to be shared accountability. If we continue to live in shame here in Australia, we are never going to progress forward. I don't want my boys to be standing up here in 20 years' time advocating and fighting for the same equality that I am, that my grandmother has for the past 60 years. That change starts with us. If we change nothing, nothing is going to change. I want change. I know everybody else wants change. I fully believe that reconciliation in Australia is absolutely not dead, and that it is at its strongest point at the moment. We have more allies than we ever have. So my grandmother was 91 when she passed. I'm 43, I've got another 50 years in me, so watch out, Australia. So thank you for inviting me here to the Welcome to Country. I can't stay for the rest of the event. I care for 8 of my little cousins. Yes, I didn't stutter, that was 8 teenagers. But yeah, well done, David. Thank you for incorporating cultural protocols into this. I look forward to hearing about the discussions, and I will get to your question after. Welcome to Country is not usually a Q&A, but I got you, bro. So I'll finish in the words of my people, the Ngunnawal people. Yumalandi Yunanga Yerabu Yangu, which means you may leave footprints on our land now, or in other words, welcome to Country. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Selena, and I'm sorry I led you astray a little bit there. We will get to a Q&A section, and then it's going to be open to the floor. Thank you so much. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker. We're fortunate to have Lucy Honan with us to discuss the cost of living crisis, which continues to be the greatest pressure on households across the country, leaving many members of our community under constant financial, emotional, and mental pressure. Lucy is working on the ground, supporting those who need it most through her role as CEO of St Vincent de Paul in our region. She also sits on the board of the ACT Council of Social Services. Thank you so much, Lucy. We know you're really busy and we really appreciate you taking time out to come and talk to us.
Thank you to Selena. I'm not sure if she's still around, but that was a beautiful welcome. Thank you. Today I was told I've got 5 to 7 minutes, and that's a bit of a challenge for me. I'm going to speak fast. I've got a lot to share with you. I thought I would just talk to 4 points. The cost of living impact, for me, that actually goes hand in hand with the housing crisis here and the rest of Australia. So I'll talk to that in the ACT context. I want to tell you a bit more about Vinnies, who we are and what we do and how we do it. I also want to share some stories from people who we have supported, and also talk to you about how you might want to help, or how I can help you if you know somebody who needs our help, how we can connect. So, and then I think I can stick around for some questions afterwards if that fits. So I'm a bit worried about this short microphone too. I'm not short. Okay, so I guess to start with, I'll just share a story about a woman who came to us. Incidentally, 65% of the people that come to Vinnies in Canberra are women, and we're seeing more younger women and more older women, and of course everybody in between escaping domestic violence. And I just want to share this one story which I think sums up the impact that we have, and also the impact that you can have. So a young woman with 2 small kids, just little kids, came to see us. She was escaping her domestic violence home. She had absolutely nothing. She came to one of our caseworkers with her kids. We found her somewhere to stay. We found her food, we organised food, clothing, filled a car up, and just gave her some general case support. She said she was okay. And about a week later, she came back with a $10 note, and we had given her about $250 to spend on household items, whatever she needed. She brought $10 back because she said she wanted that to go to the next family. So I just want that to sink in. $10 makes a huge difference, and the fact that she had brought that back to us with a specific instruction that went to the next woman with her kids really hit home. So the ACT context, Canberra's a wealthy city. On the surface, you'd think we experienced relatively low poverty here. We're generally well educated, we're well paid, and we have good quality of life. The reality is that Canberra's a very expensive place to live, particularly in the current housing and cost of living crisis, and we're the second most expensive city in the country to rent. The housing crisis is worsening, it's becoming increasingly unaffordable, and we have an inadequate supply of affordable and social housing. And the ongoing cost of living crisis has a disproportionate impact on the most marginalised, who have unequal access to work, income and educational opportunity. So if we think we're having a tough time, if you're on the margins of society, this is really having a significant impact on your life. In January, the Productivity Commission released its 2024 report on government services, which supports what we're seeing, that homelessness is still a crucial issue in the ACT. 24.7% of clients who have an unmet need for accommodation services. So 686 people out of 2,781 don't get sorted out for housing and accommodation. 2,407 people experienced homelessness for at least a month in the previous year, with 1,082 people in Canberra experiencing persistent homelessness. There are 3,174 households on the public housing waiting list. These are households, so these are not individual people, these are individuals, parents, kids, the numbers will be larger. 661 households on the community housing waiting list, and some households are waiting for up to 26 months to find stable accommodation. We're thankful for the recognition of the ACT and the federal governments of this crisis, and we know that more housing is coming. The challenge for us is it's coming very slowly and it's not enough. So in the meantime, services like ours, organisations like ours, are experiencing this growing pressure on our case management, our homelessness services, to hold these people until housing accommodation can be found. So we're asking governments, federally and the ACT governments in our budget submission, for increased support for our homelessness services. Because it's very hard to get your life in order if you don't have a home. So I'll talk a little bit now about Vinnies, Canberra Goulburn. So Vinnies was started in France in the 1830s by a young guy called Frederick Ozanam. He was in his early 20s, very privileged, went to uni, walked through the the more impoverished suburbs of Paris on his way to his lectures. And he was so struck by that, he got some friends together, called themselves a conference, and the St Vincent de Paul Society was born. In Australia, we started in 1854 in Melbourne, and in this region, we've been here for 100 years this year, working out of Acton. And our Narrabundah store is turning 60 this year. That's our oldest store. So our mission has not changed at all in that whole time. And I love it because it's simple and it's practical. To help those in need, the most marginalised in our communities, and to do that without judgment. We provide a hand up, not just a handout, and we also work to shape a more just and compassionate society. It's quite a simple mission. People come to us for all sorts of reasons, and by the time they've found their way to us, they're often broken, exhausted by life and without hope. They have slipped through the safety nets and the key pillars of our society. So when I say key pillars, education, health, physical and mental health services, domestic violence services, housing, employment, the judiciary system. Our focus is to help their immediate need, but also to support long-term security, stability and community inclusion. We have a strong focus too on social justice and advocacy, and we speak for those without a voice, engaging with our politicians and policymakers and making submissions based on our own insights and experiences. We also advocate on an individual level to help people access the services and support they need, for example, for housing, health services and asylum seeker support. So Vinnies Canberra Goulburn, the patch that I'm sitting across, has a geographic footprint 30% larger than Tasmania. That's a relatively new stat that some of my guys at work told me, and I quite like using it. We've got a lot more people too than Tassie. We are based on a diocese footprint, so that's why we're the only Vinnies that sits across New South Wales patch and the ACT. Tonight I'm trying to focus obviously on the ACT. We cover the far south coast from Bateman's Bay to Eden, across the Snowies and right out west to Lake Cargellico, and of course up to Goulburn. We run 28 shops and 50 volunteer conferences across our area. 11 shops are in the Canberra and Queanbeyan region. Funds are raised locally for their local communities in those stores, and we're a volunteer organisation. Without our wonderful, just amazing volunteers, we could not operate. We've got an incredible team of over 500 members, 1,500 volunteers, and supported by a small group of employees. There's 230 of us. We run over 20 programs supporting the community. 60% of our funding comes from the revenue raised through our stores, and only 24% from government contracts, and the rest comes from our appeals and donations and bequests. I share that statistic because I'm really conscious of maintaining that government funding proportion at about 20-25%, because our advocacy voice is very strong and we don't want to dilute that. I hope that makes sense. I'm happy to talk about that later, but we do subsidise a lot of those government funded services as well. So I wanted to talk specifically around our programs so that you can hear if there's any program that fits anybody that you know or you think you can either help or you need help through those programs. So I think most of us know one or two or maybe three things that Vinnies does. I'm just going to run through this list quickly as I can, but I think it's important that you understand the breadth of our work. We support thousands of Canberrans every year across our services. We provide emergency assistance through our crisis line and volunteer conferences. We provide home visits and material aid and a friendly year. Food, accommodation, rent, fuel, car registration so people can get to work, utility bills, medical bills, school costs, all of those. Homelessness services, we run several. We run the Street to Home service, which is an assertive outreach for people living rough or on the streets. Samaritan House Crisis Accommodation Centre for men. We run the temporary accommodation for many folks, and we head lease over 120 properties. And housing and support services for families and young parents under 25. Food is the number one thing that people come to us for, and I think a lot of other charities are seeing the same thing. Food poverty in this city is almost unbelievable. We run the Blue Door at Ainslie Village, where we receive 1,800 drop-ins a month, over 30,000 free meals we've done there in the last year. We've recently taken on the Roadhouse in Civic, which we provide evening meals for between 60 and 80 people every day. We run our night patrol vans. That's a bingo question, everybody knows about our night patrol vans. We're putting on a new route in Gungahlin because the demand is so high. So they go out every single night of the year. Actually, Dave's been out. You're very welcome if anyone wants to join me and come out on those vans. We also have an extremely large pantry network through our conferences. I should explain our conferences. It's a French terminology, but it's the small groups of member volunteers who sit in various locations, and if you call in on through the crisis line, we'll connect you with one of those conferences, and they'll come and talk to you. They'll come and visit you in your home, and they'll try and supply and help you with whatever it is that you need. And then, of course, we hand out emergency food vouchers as well. So we also obviously supply clothing and other material goods such as toiletries, household items, white goods, furniture, sleeping bags, tents and swags. And we run youth programs and camps for disadvantaged youth and young carers, and we run a mini Vinnies program in primary schools. We also are very committed to supporting migrants and refugees in two ways. We run a migrant and refugee program supporting kids with homework and language after school, and that's a volunteer program coordinated by a couple of people in our office. It also provides us with a really great way to access the parents and help with things that they need that they may not necessarily have been plugged into. So that's a double benefit, really. We work very closely with Companion House and the Canberra Refugee Support Team. We provide financial and advocacy support to around 42 families of asylum seekers and refugees in Canberra. We run the Community Inclusion Program out at Oaks Estate. So I don't know if many of you know Oaks Estate. It's very close to Queanbeyan, but it sits in the ACT, and we run, traditionally it was temporary housing, but because we're struggling to find, there used to be a lovely progression where you'd move from crisis housing to temporary housing into social housing more permanently, but there's no exit points now because there's no accommodation. The demand is outstripping the supply. So people are blocked up in those areas that they didn't expect to be for such a long time. We also run education programs supporting people into tertiary education. As we know, education is key. And if you want to change your circumstances, that's a very impactful way of doing that. So we support people who would never have considered going into tertiary education into a program with the ACU, which is fantastic. Some amazing stories come out of there. I'm nearly done. We also run the Home Energy Efficiency Program. So this is working with folks on low incomes and in low quality housing to better manage their electricity bills, their power bills, and we fit them with drought curtains, and we provide heated throws to help people manage winter. So that's quite a significant program that we work with the ACT government. And the Justice Housing Program, so people coming out of the McConaughey Centre need to have an address if you're going to have bail. So a lot of people get held up in the system because they can't come out. So we run these programs. We have about 12 houses, 2 houses for women and the other for men. And we have case managers who work very closely with those folks to help them into employment, medical, dental, all of those things. And we run women's return to work programs, helping women obviously return to work, gain their confidence, and we help provide them with brand new clothing, interview skills, CVs, all of that, which is another amazing program. And I've already talked about advocacy and social justice. So it's quite a lot, and I'm sorry for that big long list, but we are helping a lot of people in a lot of areas. And so please do refer people to us if you think we can help. What we see in Canberra, this is what I was asked to talk about in the community. So from the Vinnie's perspective, so I mentioned this before, the number one reason people come to us is for food and accommodation in this city. Are you shocked? It blows me. I've said that a lot. I'm still blown away every time I say that. We've seen a 25% increase in demand for our services across the board in the past year. And in some areas, that's up to 45%. I'm just talking about averages. People who we supported several years ago, who might have, who did get their life back on track, are now coming back. They're tipping back into that real risk of poverty and homelessness again. So that's a telltale sign. We're also seeing people who used to donate to us, coming to us for help. We're seeing donations reduce as well, understandably. Over the Christmas period and January, we've seen the calls to our crisis line increase from what used to be about 50 or 60 a day up to 140 to 170 calls a day. And this is just Vinnie's. So you can think all those other organisations with crisis lines, with helplines, with support teams, we're all feeling it. I'm just giving you the Vinnie's perspective. As well as the people we've always supported, and I guess that sort of old-fashioned paradigm of what a person at risk of homelessness was, or somebody living on the streets, as well as that, we're seeing a very different cohort. And we're seeing more people who've never, ever approached a charity before. And we're also seeing people who just can't make ends meet even though they're working And in some cases, they've got 2 jobs. So they'll come to us for food or all those other add-ons while they're hanging on to their mortgage and their rent. We're also seeing an increase in women and children escaping family violence and more older women and young women. I talked about that before. And we're not a specialist family violence service, but across the board, every service like ours is seeing the same. And there's nowhere to put them. We don't have enough accommodation, and we don't have adequate brokerage funding to be able to put them into hotels in the first instance. So that is a pretty confronting, very confronting situation. We're seeing more people living in their cars, mums and kids in their cars, going to school, trying to go to work. We're seeing more couch surfing, people living in tents or sleeping rough. I just also wanted to make the point that people are really distressed, and understandably so. We're seeing increased complexity. So people with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different health issues. They might be struggling with alcohol addiction. They might be struggling with relationships and accommodation. So you put all those things together and it's pretty bleak. I am going to give you a happy story at the end. So I guess my point is the system is so complex, and we have Vinnie's have funded our own case managers to help people navigate the system and help people actually get their birth certificates, get their registration, get themselves onto the housing list, that kind of really practical assistance that we can do. And we'll drive people there and make sure that we're there at that certain time. And that's important. If somebody cares for you and helps you to do that, it's amazing how you can actually progress. I did also want to share another story about a woman who comes to our night patrol vans. She's got a job, she's got a mortgage. No, sorry, not a mortgage, she pays rent. She's got 3 kids, and she comes to the night patrol vans to get her sandwiches for school lunches for the next day. Because she cannot do that. We also help her out with other things. But that's just another story about, and this might be somebody in your team, somebody you work with. You'd be amazed at who comes to Vinnie's for help. Got another really good story. Have I got time? Quick one. About a couple who donated their investment property to Vinnie's recently so that we could put a family in there, family suffering, another woman and her children escaping domestic violence. So that's pretty cool. That was pretty fantastic. So I just want to talk through about how you can help, or if you know someone that needs to contact us, or you can put us in contact with. So if you know someone, let them know about us. Shop at our Vinnie's stores. You can shop at our Vinnie's stores because every cent in there is spent locally, supporting services. I get lots of emails about pricing, how, we can't get a $2 t-shirt anymore, and you'd be amazed. But actually, I just want to make that point that all the revenue that comes into those stores is spent in the local, in the ACT. So that's important. You can volunteer your time. We're always looking for volunteers. We cannot get enough volunteers because a lot of people have to go to work now because the cost of living is having an impact on that. You can also encourage your employer to support us through their workplace giving program. You can make a donation of funds or goods or sponsor a service close to your heart. And if you're a community, corporate or public service leader, then please consider joining our CEO Sleep Out this year. It's in an amazing, amazing place in celebration of our 100 years, but that's another way that you can support us. And I just want to finish with this quote from St Vincent de Paul. Kindness costs nothing, but means everything. Thank you so much for listening. Sorry I took so much time. Thank
you. I'm taking it out. Lucy, thank you so much. That was really, really quite eye-opening and a little bit alarming. And I think Vinnie's is a real household name in Australia, but I don't think everybody understands just how deeply and broadly you guys support people and keep their heads above water. So thank you so much. Over the past few weeks, David has been inviting the community to submit their questions over Slido, and I promise we will get to you soon. You can't submit any new ones now, but you can upvote existing questions by just using the QR code behind me and clicking on the question that you want to hear answered by just clicking the thumbs up. We'll only have time for 2, so please get voting if you want to hear the answer to that question. There'll also be an opportunity to continue the conversation after formal proceedings close. Just find anyone wearing a Team Pocock t-shirt and they can help you. We'll stay around and have a chat. For now, I'd like to invite Senator David Pocock to the stage to say a few words.
Thank you, Tash. Outstanding MCing. Tash's first, is your first town hall MCing? Your first town hall MCing. Thank you very much. And thanks again to Lucy Honan and the Vinnie's team for all the amazing work that you do. It's eye-opening, it's sobering to live in a city that is seen by everyone as this wealthy bubble, but to know just how hard so many Canberrans are doing it, and very grateful for the work that you and your team do, and many others who are working hard in that area. Maybe just to, I'm keen just to start talking about cost of living, because this is something we get a lot of phone calls and emails about, and I think is really being felt across the country and here in Canberra, as we heard. We've met with obviously frontline services, and then the banks and the banking associations, and one of the things they ask me to tell people is get in touch early. Like, get in touch early. If you think you're heading towards mortgage stress, call your bank. They'd like to make a plan early, and I think it's probably the same with services. Like, there's obviously stigma and shame tied up in putting your hand out for help. But if you need it, please do reach out to a service like Vinnie's. Clearly, there's a lot more that politicians need to be doing when it comes to cost of living. There's all the immediate stuff, which is really important because people are struggling, but at the same time, we've got to start dealing with some of the root causes of this. It's no good just going around putting on band-aids. I'd love to see some bigger conversations with the major parties in the parliament about how we actually create an economy, a society that is going to look after people, because I think most people are starting to ask questions and realise that it's probably not working. If this is going, if everything's going to plan, then we need a different plan here. And in the short term, I think there's some positive signs. Interest rates were on hold. Looks like inflation is levelling off. We've seen real wage growth, which is really encouraging for people. We saw the government and then the opposition agree to redesign stage 3 tax cuts. This is something that almost the entire crossbench has been calling for since the election. The proposed stage 3 tax cuts weren't the right thing to do for Australia, and I think it was a great result to see them modified. But I think we also need to see a lot more in this next federal budget that deals with some of the really immediate needs of people when it comes to not being able to afford to pay your electricity or gas bill or put food on the table. We've been looking at things like women fleeing domestic and family violence. Turns out here in the ACT, we have the lowest rate of women getting the payment from the government, and that comes down to having a New South Wales service provider. So we've been pushing the federal and territory government on that. Other things that people really happen, when people are feeling that their budget is tight, is access to GPs. And we know here in Canberra, lowest ratio of GPs population in the country, worse than many rural and regional communities. We've got the lowest number of bulk billing doctors, the highest gap fees. This is something that I've been taking up with the federal government. We have to have a plan here. The argument is often, well, Canberra's very wealthy, so people can pay the gap fee. That's not the case for a whole bunch of people. And we know that we all pay the price when people don't have access to a GP, to that continuity of care, to early intervention. People end up in emergency, and people end up waiting in emergency. And so that's something that I'll continue to push the government on. When it comes to energy bills, there's plenty more that could be done. I'd love to see more electrification, and a shout out to Electrify Canberra, who are doing some really good work in that space. I think there's huge opportunities there when it comes to energy bill relief. And then I think the big one is housing. It seems to me housing underpins the whole cost of living crisis that we're talking about. And we've seen the government trying different things. There was the Housing Australia Future Fund, set up 30,000 social and affordable houses over the next 5 years. They've now brought forward the Help to Buy shared equity scheme, which will help people who don't have the bank of mum and dad to help with the deposit. But that's 10,000 people a year for 4 years. So I'd argue that we're just tinkering here. And if we're serious about housing, we've got to start at a high level. What's housing for? Is this something we believe everyone in our community should be able to afford, or is this an investment vehicle that it's really hard to get into the market, but once you're on that ladder, it's pretty good. And it's arguably easier now to buy your second house than your first for many people. And from what I'm hearing from Canberrans, that's not working for us. And that then leads you to discussions about tax reform and how should we tax investment properties. What concessions should we give? What do we give to people who've invested based on the current rules? Are there ways to grandfather it, to limit it to the number of properties? I think that there's definitely a way forward. I find it very frustrating that the major parties just don't want to have this debate, and so that's something that we're constantly trying to get going, talking to my colleagues in the Senate through the media, and we're working on a few other things which we'll hopefully be able to announce in the next few months. Just a quick recap of legislation that's come through in the last little while since the last town hall. There was the closing the loopholes, industrial relations reform. Industrial relations reform, I honestly find the toughest area to deal with. There are such different views on the way forward. And I think in the end we've landed in a spot that really strikes the right balance. The thing that I've seen in there over the last 2 years is if you can get to a point with this big contentious reform where no one is totally happy, but generally people can live with it and think that it's decent, then you've probably got to a good spot. And my sense was that's where we landed. And then in the end, there are some great things for workers in there. I think particularly around protecting gig workers, ensuring that Qantas and some of the mining companies can't undercut salaries using labour hire, a whole range of things there. And there was a huge amount of advocacy and really good work that was done in a really impressive way between industry and unions, businesses and workers that I think led to good outcomes. But equally, there's also some really important protections for small businesses to ensure that they're not burdened by red tape and are better looked after, because I think they have some serious challenges that they're still facing coming out of COVID. There was the update to the Murray-Darling Basin plan that went through, an update to the Water Act. Again, something that doesn't necessarily directly impact people in the ACT. We're not actually part of the Murray-Darling Basin plan, even though we're on the Upper Murrumbidgee, but did a couple of trips, got out, spoke to a heap of irrigators, graziers, First Nations people, environmentalists, and I think again landed on some pretty good reforms and managed to get $50 million for the Upper Murrumbidgee, which, I mean, it's a stretch of river that I just love and love spending time there, and it's been doing it pretty tough. It has 90 to 99% of its flows diverted every year into snowy hydro, and so we've got some better guarantees around flows and some money for river restoration work. What else has been? I have two private senators' bills in front of the Senate. The duty of care bill, which would legislate a duty of care to young people and future generations when it comes to climate decisions. So when a minister or a delegated decision maker makes a decision, they would, one, have to first assess the impact on young people, and then they couldn't proceed if it would have a material impact. We had a full day of Senate committee hearings last week, which was really interesting. We heard from so many amazing people, and so that'll continue down through the sort of Senate process. The other one is what we've called the Fair Pay for Radio Play bill, which is removing a cap on what musicians, artists can get paid by commercial radio. It's a historical 1% of revenue cap. It's the only cap in any sort of copyright law. Not just in Australia, but we can't find an equivalent anywhere. And there's been, I think, 6 different reviews and reports that have recommended that gets abolished. And so we've been working with artists who want to be able to just negotiate with radio on that. And again, we had a full day of hearings. One of the other things that's going through the Senate is that we managed to get a inquiry into sovereign technology capability here in Australia. This ties into procurement, which is a huge issue for Canberra businesses, and something that I think is such a huge opportunity for us as a country to ensure that we're using procurement to build local capability and to really foster local innovation, businesses that are world leading. We should be rewarding them and investing in them. Currently, we've got this notion that the multinationals, the big American companies are the way to go, and we're just shoveling millions, billions of dollars into these companies, and I'd argue that we're not actually seeing the value for money that we should be getting. And so that's something that we've been working with local business community on, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the stories that come out of that. It's already been a busy start to the year, but there's some really big things coming up. I just wanted to flag them. We'll be doing a lot of consultation on them, and would love people to get in touch if you have views or concerns or want to flag something. The first one is aged care reform. The government has committed to essentially rewriting the Aged Care Act. It's a big piece of work, and so important that we get it right. We've seen the issues in aged care, and I think this is an opportunity to deal with those. And so we've just started, sort of been waiting for the drafting to come out from the government, and we've just started consultation on that. So we'll hopefully be having a conversation with some of you on that. There's the Help to Buy housing legislation that has come through. I'll be moving amendments to try and expand the scheme. They've curtailed it at $10,000 a year for 4 years. I think there's a real argument that if we are helping people get into the market, that there should be some sort of similar scheme where if you're in mortgage stress and you're having to sell your house, you could potentially sell 40% to the government to reduce your mortgage repayments. And so that's something we're looking at and talking to the drafters and talking to the government about that. There's the university reform. on the back of the University Accord, so we're consulting with universities and students and researchers on that. Again, another big piece of work. School funding, environmental law reform. I'm pretty concerned the government's kicking it down the road. This is so important that we get this right as a country. Like we're a world leader in extinction, and that's not going to change unless we at least get good environmental laws. But I think that has to be tied into a much broader conversation about how we live here and the decisions we make about living like we're here for a long time and loving this place and looking after it. So you'll no doubt hear more from me on that. A few other things which the other one is the misinformation bill. I had big concerns about the way that it was drafted. We haven't heard anything else from government on that, so I know we received quite a bit of correspondence when they put out their draft legislation. We're sort of just waiting to see if they bring something else forward. And then the other two, which we have been engaging on, and again, I'm just waiting on the government to do something, is on gambling. People want the government to deal with gambling. Peter Murphy chaired a committee that looked at this and had multi-partisan, a sort of unified view across the major parties, independents, saying there needs to be a total ban on gambling advertising phased in over a few years. And we've basically heard nothing from the government on that. And so we'll keep... Sorry? Okay, well, I'd rather freedom for my kids from gambling advertising, but we can discuss that later. Sure. And then the other one was electoral reform. And again, government seems to be leaving it late. I think there's a really strong argument that we have an amazing democracy, but we can make it more transparent. We can have a system where you know who's donating to political parties, you know where the money's coming from, and so that's something that will continue, and I think it's something that the entire crossbench is pushing the government on. So that's kind of what's on the radar, but I would love to be moved to questions, because that'll be more interesting. Do you want to go Slido first, or? Sure. Yeah. Who's got the mics? Tom? And Fee? No? Yep. Great. These lights are quite glaring.
Hi.
Hello.
Big fan. Voted for you.
Well,
basically, I submitted a question on the Slido, but my question is, the biggest issue with capital gains is if you own a property in your primary residence and you rent out that property, rent out a room, you cop capital gains straight away, right? And I'm an accountant, understand it, but nobody else does really. And people are scared of renting out their spare rooms. If they actually remove that from the capital gains tax legislation and also made the income exempt so that you could only claim up to how much money you earn, not go into a loss, I reckon it would actually solve a lot of ways to the market in the market property, because you'll get a lot of people that have got granny flats or have have a big house with 2 or 3 bedrooms and they just don't have it. They would start renting their places out, and it would actually then reduce the need. It would actually then allow families and others to actually get the houses where people that can just have a room or don't need to actually rent a 2-bedroom place.
Thanks for raising that.
What are your thoughts?
So I saw that question come in, and we, I think with where we're at with housing, we need all these solutions. There's no silver bullet here, and we should be doing everything we can and looking at every option. I'd love to chat more after this, because I'm not sure whether that's up to interpretation with the ATO or if it's a hard and fast rule. Yeah? Okay. Well, okay. On the proportion that's rented. Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, let's chat on. Yeah, I'd be happy to ask questions and take that up and see what can be done. Yeah. I don't have the mic, so it'll come down to you.
I'm Jess. My question is, often, well, I don't know what the suicide rate is in Canberra, and just wondering what your thoughts are on how we can better, help suicide prevention in the whole of Australia, but just particularly in Canberra. There is mental health wards and things at hospitals, but it's only acute care. How can we better support people that are going through chronic mental health issues, because there's no long-term mental health treatment facilities, same with drug and alcohol and all that kind of thing. So, yeah.
I mean, it's a huge issue, and I think there's people in Canberra doing great work in this space. You look at what Lifeline are doing. You look at things like running for resilience, walking for resilience, connecting people up, but it's undeniable that there's a shortage of access to psychiatrists. And I think, again, back to my point about early intervention, it's so hard to get in and it's so expensive that I think a lot of people are just kicking it down the road until it gets to the point where you have to. And so, yeah, I mean, this is something we hear about, and it's one of those things where we sort of. I met with the ACT government minister the other day to talk about mental health and the eating disorder clinic and like what is happening in that space, because there's too many Canberrans having to travel to see a specialist, go to Sydney or go elsewhere. So I don't have a sort of fix for you, but it is something we're aware of, and Rory in particular, maybe you can chat to him afterwards, is doing a lot of work in this space. So thanks for raising it.
My topic is completely different.
Sure.
Climate change.
Yes.
Things are happening. We've got disasters all over the world. There doesn't seem much recognition in this country about it. But what worries me the most in particular is that education, kids are learning about climate change environment in primary school because of the so-called Australian curriculum. There's not much in high school and colleges, and kids are unaware. And yet we've got a short time, we've got to do something about it. They need education, they need awareness. It's a real issue.
It is. I can't remember who recommended it, but there was a recommendation from one of the big climate organisations that by 2025 it should be in all school curriculums, because this is the biggest challenge young people, all of us face, but particularly young people, and so they should be learning about it, not to scare people, but to prepare us for what is happening, because it is. It already is. You look at some of the minimum temperatures 16 degrees above average. So, yeah, the government's not doing enough. I think the crossbench has been very, very clear on that, and will continue to push them. But I think the issue with something like climate change is it has to sit across the whole of government. Yeah, no, I agree. So, yeah, thank you for raising that.
Hi, David.
Yes, hello.
I have 3 questions. Number one, how is it that the pension system in this country is not tied to a living wage, and in a country as wealthy as ours, we have a need for Vinnies, we have a need for the Smith family, we have a need for Anglicare, people on the streets begging. How can that be in a country like this? That's my first question. The second question is, how is it that the wealthy people of my generation can bid for a two-bedroom unit and be able to outbid at auction any young couple who have saved and are paying for their property in after-tax dollars when the so-called investor of my generation is safe in the knowledge that every dollar they bid is tax deductible with a 50% capital gains discount with negative geared income and able to blow the kids out of the water any day of the week for affordable housing. My third question is, how is it that in this country people can get a free education from TAFE, go to the Western Australian mines, earn $200,000 a year, and yet somebody who wants to be a paramedic or a speech therapist ends up with $160,000 in HECS owed to the government, and in the intergenerational report, the government sees young people like that as only a number on the balance sheet, such that HECS represents 2% of this country's GDP through debt owed by our next generation to this generation.
Wow. Thanks. So, three great questions. I'll try and remember them. I mean, on the first one, I would say it's about priorities and revenue. As a country, we're incredibly wealthy, really. You wouldn't know it at the moment, but we are. And it's about priorities. Do we want to have a system where you can live on the pension, that you can live on JobSeeker or AusStudy, AbStudy, or do we want the current system where you're struggling? And for me, seeing the way that at the moment, to take a sort of topical example, the petroleum resource rent tax, it's our way of getting money back for offshore oil and gas. The last time I checked at estimates, we had received 0 cents of offshore LNG petroleum resource rent tax. Like, it has been set up in a way, it basically seems to be written by industry to not have to pay. And it makes no sense. These are our resources. Once they're gone, they're gone. We should be getting, these companies can still make a profit, as they do in Norway. Norway has a 78% tax on their oil. They now have a $2 trillion sovereign wealth fund. No national debt. And so for me, it's about a... Sorry, David, yeah. While we're talking Scandinavians, in 2021, in Australia, IKEA grossed $1.26 billion. Their clever accountants reduced that amount to $40 million in taxable income by virtue of transfer pricing and debt loading. And of that $40 million, IKEA paid $12 million on their $1.26 billion gross revenue. In other words, 1%. Yeah, right. Yeah, you and me aren't unable to do that. Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think something that really frustrates people. I mean, the second point. I think there's a lot of young people who go to auctions and are pretty dismayed. And again, I think it's that, you've seen people like Alan Kohler and others really call it out as we're seeing this intergenerational gap when it comes to wealth. And I think we've got to start turning that around, and that takes you into the territory of tax reform, which I haven't seen an appetite from the major parties to talk about yet, but I'm certainly seeing it in the community. There have to be sensible ways to make changes there. And your third question was, universities and TAFEs. And we're in a situation now where I was talking to someone who works at the Canberra Hospital, and they live in a caravan park. Can't afford to get by. You've got teachers who are not just finding it hard to live near their school now, but are also forking out thousands of dollars to buy supplies for their students. Again, I think it just comes down to what we value as a community, and what we sort of think what is important in life. What is sort of the good life? What do we want to invest in? It seems that the people who educate our kids, I think, should be paid well to do that. So, yeah, I mean, these are huge. Yeah, these are huge challenges. But I think it's one where politicians are out of line with what the community wants. And I think, again, a lot of people are saying, well, it's not working. When the teacher who's teaching my kids at school has to commute an hour, and we've surely able to find a way to start to turn this around. But yeah. There was. So one of the things that we've been pushing, and seems like there could be an openness to it, is to actually. I was arguing that HECS should be at CPI or the long-term government bond rate, whichever's the lowest. And so you're giving students the very lowest possible rate of indexation. One of the other things which I hadn't learnt until we started to look into HECS is that currently HECS is indexed on the 1st of June every year. Everything you've paid up, say you get into the workforce, you start paying off your HECS, everything you pay off until the 1st of June doesn't get deducted. You get indexed on the total amount, which seems ridiculous to me. And I think that's, these are small changes that are not going to solve so there's that. And then there's obviously the Job Ready Graduates program, which has just been an abject failure. Doubling the cost of some degrees. And I've talked to students who one started 1 year, one started the next year in the same course, and the one who started a year later will have double the HECS. And so I think that needs to be sorted as soon as possible. So I think there's some things that we can act on, the government can act on immediately. But yeah, longer term, I think it's looking at the cost of courses and the cost of living for students who don't have wealthy parents to help them get through uni. Yeah, that's we'll wait and see. We can come back. We can come back.
Let him finish.
I'm going to ask, what do you think of Joe Biden's announcement to cancel billions of dollars of American tax in the context of what you just said for this country?
Yeah, great for students. Yeah, and I guess they've got their student debt is on a whole nother level. I guess the way HECS was designed was so that everyone could afford to go to university and pay it off over time. I think we've seen things like Job Ready Graduate really distort that, and start to head towards some of the hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt that you see some American students have. But yeah, it's certainly for young people, it's a huge issue. Righto, let's go next.
All right, so I suppose over the last 3 years, or 4 years, however long it's been, we've seen that Australian government doesn't really hold any power, and they're following their orders from the World Economic Forum and the WHO and stuff, and the UN. What power do you actually have?
Power do I have?
Do you have any power?
Yeah, I think the Senate at the moment with the numbers, the government doesn't have a majority, and so they are constantly needing. Do you guys have any power? Well, I'm not the government. I'm here as an independent senator for the ACT to represent the ACT and push for issues that matter to us. I can see some of the skepticism around the UN and the World Health Organization, but I think it's important to remember why we have those institutions. Sure, I think there's some stuff there, but after World War II, there's a real need to actually build that international consensus and have a way to have debates, discussions, deal with conflict. And I don't know, it's hard to say that yes, with any bureaucracy there's huge issues, but it's hard to say that there haven't been benefits from that. And it's concerning now to see kind of this withdrawal of nations from that rules-based order, because I think it's really important. And it's... Well, when it comes to the UN and the WEF, absolutely nothing, mate. I'm a federal politician, but I don't understand how that's...
So, thank you. In the interest of time, we might just switch over to Slido. Okay. I'll ask you a couple of questions. Can we pull that out? We've got a bunch of people who are online only, so we want to make sure that they can also participate, if that's all right. So the biggest question upvoted the most was, why is there less funding and upgrades or improvements in Tuggeranong as opposed to Civic, Belconnen and Gungahlin? Tuggeranong is being neglected, according to the asker.
Yeah, this is a good question. Something I've heard a lot about during. Yes, yeah, as you should. I mean, this is a concern I heard when during my campaign, when I was talking to people, and since, that people down south feel like they're not seeing the same upgrades. And I guess one of the, to be upfront, one of the challenges I've found being a federal senator is that people bring a whole range of issues that are territory issues, and so I've been doing my best to advocate to the territory government on a range of issues, from Phillip Pool to sports ovals to community sporting infrastructure to basketball to and really encourage them to consult and to actually invest in those things, which we know are good for community. My view is that whichever town centre you live around in the ACT, you should have access to a thriving town centre, to services, to places for people to meet up, kids to play sport, places to walk, and so would love to see more investment down here at a federal level. We've been pushing the Australian government to invest more in the nation's capital. Like, we shouldn't be viewing investment in Canberra as a waste of time. We should, be proud of Canberra as the national capital and be investing in the things that make us the national capital, but also investing in us as a city, as not just a city of 450,000 people, but a city that services over 1 million people in the region. And I think historically we just haven't seen that investment. We've trawled through the last 10 years of budget papers, and it's not there. The previous government had a city deal sort of program. What was it, maybe 9 billion? Where's Tom? 10 billion. $10 billion invested in city deals. ACT was the only jurisdiction not to get one. So not a single cent here. Every other state or territory got one, some got two. And so we've been pushing them to invest. They've since announced the National Capital Investment Framework, which was an announcement that they have plans to make plans, which I'm learning is a thing in politics. You announce that you have plans to make more plans. And so we've been consulting with Canberrans on, well, what should that look like? What's the website called? Yeah, visionforcanberra.com. And we've sort of put together the ideas that we've got from Canberrans, and we'll keep pushing the federal government to invest, and also the territory government to invest more down south. So I do hear you on that.
One more from Slido, and then we'll go back to the floor. When will there be whistleblower protections for APS staff talking up about corruption in the APS?
This is so urgent. We saw the government bring in some updates to whistleblower protections along with the National Anti-Corruption Commission. But everyone knows that our whistleblower protection laws are broken. You look at what's happening to Richard Boyle at the moment, for David McBride, for blowing the whistle in the public interest, and they're being prosecuted. Something I've met with the Attorney General about, written to him a number of times, and have been working with crossbenchers on this. The member for Indi, Helen Haynes, and the member for Clark, Andrew Wilkie, have really led in this space and been doing work on them on pushing the government to have a dedicated whistleblower protection authority, somewhere that you can actually go as a whistleblower and get the support and then have protection. Yeah, and I think really worryingly in the David McBride case, we're again seeing national security, and we'll never know. And we saw this with Bernard. I've got no idea about Darren Hinch. Before my time, sorry. We saw with Bernard Kaleri and Witness K's trial, everything done in secret, and we've seen now with the NAC, it's also in secret. And I get that there's some things that need to be kept secret, but I think there should be far more transparency. Exactly. Sure. Agree. Yeah, and so I think Australians want more transparency.
I'm just thinking, so a couple of things, just awareness that some things can trigger people in the room, so we should be careful about language, if that's all right. And then secondly, we're just going to put a little bit of structure in so that the microphone will go from one person to the next. So the next person with the microphone, if you can put your hand up.
Yeah. Hello? Yeah. Senator, I've got a question, if I might, sir.
Oh, yes.
Following on from the last that spoke about Senator, if I can ask this question, please. Following on the climate change question, and this is very respectful. What do you say to this friend of mine whose ageing mother spent her last years cowering over a single bar radiator heater in the winter, when we know that anything we do in this country, as much as we want to, is going to be replaced by the good folk of China and our wonderful friends in India within a week? Surely there's got to be a common sense balance that doesn't destroy people's jobs, their livelihoods, and our economy as a first world country that somehow addresses this. So what do you say to this poor man who loses his mother cowering over a one-bar heater, knowing that anything we do here is really not going to be much?
I mean, I think this is an argument that we should talk about, but we're facing this massive challenge, but it just so happens that Australia is the developed country that stands to lose the most from climate inaction. We're the most exposed. If you look at our farmers, they're already 20% down on their profit since the year 2000. That's ABARES data. But we also stand to gain the most from bold leadership and action. Well, this will actually create a whole different economy. This has we have all the things that people are going to want. We've got the iron ore. We can have the cheap electricity to turn that into green steel, to then export that to value add, to be exporting green aluminium. I mean, I don't. Yeah. So, I mean, Yeah. Yeah.
It's great to hear the robust debate, but I think this is working best for most of the room when the senator's answering questions that are delivered through the microphone.
Yeah.
It is great to have the community come together. There's conversations that can have afterwards, but maybe we can go back to what Tash spoke about before, and I think probably everyone feels the same way.
No, I think you're touching on a few really important things for us to be discussing as Australians, as communities. Nuclear. I just find it so disingenuous of the coalition. After 10 years of never bringing this up, all of a sudden now they've got all the plans, they want to do it. It is so hard not to be cynical, and this is just another delay tactic. Another delay tactic to not get on with what we know we need to do. Yes, China, India now dwarf our emissions, but we are a developed economy that has benefited from fossil fuels, and we're also one of the biggest fossil fuel exporters in the world. So, the level of emissions aside, we're also one of the highest per capita emitters. But the level of emissions aside, I think this is at its core a moral issue. Do you just say, well, I'm a small player, so I'm not going to do anything? Or do you say, I'm a small player, well, we're actually a middle power. We're going to do absolutely everything we can. And at every opportunity, we're going to be saying to the big players, you need to do more. Our lives are on the line. The Great Barrier Reef's on the line. I would love to see more of that advocacy. The other point that you raised was around infrastructure. And again, I think this is something that we have to do so much more work on, because it is going to impact regional communities. But there's also opportunities there for those regional communities, and this is something that I've been working with Helen Haynes on. You know, she's in Indi, surrounded by renewable energy projects, farmers, and seeing the conflict there. Andrew Dyer, the Australian Energy Infrastructure Commissioner, did a review, I think over 60 different meetings and roundtables, and there are some serious shortcomings when it comes to consultation by proponents and owners of renewable energy projects. There's some serious shortcomings when it comes to the benefits that communities are seeing. You'll get some farmers who are doing really well by having turbines on their farm or a solar farm. But what's in it for the surrounding farmers? What's in it for the community? And looking at environmental impacts as well. And so that's something. We've now got this report. It wasn't great. There's huge issues with the way that people have been engaging with these communities, but I do think there's also opportunities there to turn that around. So that's something that we'll keep engaging with, with Helen Haynes and the government on. Thank you. Come next.
Two easy questions.
Sure.
Two easy questions. The first one is, what is your interpretation of the AI agenda? What's basically being rolled out? What do you think about it? How's it going to go? And so on. Second one, is there any chance that you could convince other ex-Wallabies to please run for politics too? Because we clearly need more awesome dudes like you, man. You know what I'm saying? Thank you.
I mean, on the first one, I think there's clearly huge challenges and opportunities with AI. I think Australia has been we've definitely been slow in uptake. You look, we're one of the sort of slowest adopters of AI in the OECD, but the last sort of stats I saw. And I think we've left the sort of regulation discussion late, but to the government's credit, they are now moving on this and are really trying to get feedback and sort of work through how do you regulate an industry that is just moving so quickly. And I think it's one of those things where you really have to be creating guardrails rather than trying to constantly regulate things that are clearly just going to get, it's moving too fast to do that. So we're engaging with, there's a bunch of amazing companies here in Canberra who are working on various parts of AI and generative AI. And so engaging with them, engaging on the government, and really trying to push them on I guess, their timeline. Like, things are moving so fast, I think we need to see a response. One of the things have been raising with government is I'm really keen to see them do something around the use of generative AI in elections. I think there's just huge potential for misuse. We've already seen in the US the use of AI-generated robocalls mimicking politicians' voices. I'd love to see something like that just ruled out. I don't think there is a good use for it at this point. So yeah, it's a space we're sort of looking at. We've also co-founded Parliamentary Friends of Tech Policy, and we've been using that to engage, experts from the ANU and elsewhere with other parliamentarians to try and get sort of multi-partisan engagement and support for that. On the second one, no idea. It's a whole different type of contact sport in there.
Honourable Senator, my name is Indrajit Roy from Tuggeranong. You have pointed out, it has been pointed out that climate change is a major issue. Yes. Everybody is looking into this. But when we are blaming China and India for dwarfing us with their carbon emissions, are we doing justice when asking one of the corrupt businessmen from some of that country to work with a Galilee basins, open cast mines, and irreversible damage to the climate, as well as the environment in that area, including flora, fauna, as well as the Great Barrier Reef? What exactly we are doing?
You're talking
when
about...
when we are talking about the climate change, when we are talking about that alternative energy, when we are blaming others, at the same time, we are doing something which is wrong, and asking and giving. It is not that Australian people is earning money. It is the corrupt businessman from some of the country he's a corrupt businessman and is getting money from that our nations. Where those money is going?
That's Adani he's talking.
Yeah, the Adani.
And yes,
Bravas,
and I do not see anybody is putting this. So what exactly your action on that point?
Yeah.
Number one.
The Great Barrier Reef, yeah.
Number two.
Number two. Petroleum Royal Commission.
Number two.
1960 to 1966.
Number two, sir. Number two is very important.
Yes.
We are having an aging populations. As per the report of 2020, it was 16%, and by 2026, it become 26%. So we are just middle of that. With that aging populations, there was no incentives for the young generations for going for a higher education and develop the nations for the technology oriented. Just a few moments earlier, somebody commented that people who do the TAFE going to the Western Australia earning 200,000, 250,000, and somebody is doing good, giving a hex of $160,000, earning nothing, peanuts, not even afford to get a house. Now my point is very simple. You have older generations, something like me, as a baby boomers, latter part of the baby boomer, still they are able to work. But you are making it a point that they should not work. So a kind of discrimination exists. IIM is one of the big such example of that discriminations. For so many years, 15 long years, I am a scientist and I am a researcher in the field of that earth science. I know what is happening in Galilee basins and what is the problem. Irreversible damage to the flora, fauna, and the environment of that. And getting that money will be pumped out from this soil by a corrupt businessman, someone. And government is giving $2 billion even subsidies for that. Is it the right thing?
No, definitely not. And thank you for, thank you for raising that and the work you've done. I went to a number of protests against the Adani, I think what's it called now, Bravas mine. Crazy thing to do, given everything we know to be approving new fossil fuel projects. And I think, sorry? Well, yeah, I mean, there's some serious allegations against, yeah. 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 Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, and I think on your point, Australia does have a huge role to play. We are the second biggest fossil fuel exporter in the world. We're not a small player. What we do here will have an outsized role in showing leadership. Yeah.
Not only that, not a single people of Australia will be benefited from that. Because entire Australian continent's flora, fauna, and environment damage is already damaged.
Yes. On your, you mentioned something there that I think is we've heard politicians and the coal industry for decades say, oh, Australia has cleaner coal. I've actually been working with Andrew Wilkie and whistleblowers who are from the coal industry, and they allege, and we've tabled a whole bunch of documents and evidence that coal companies have been manipulating the testing of coal to make it look cleaner, to meet their export requirements. And there's just pages upon pages of coal quality tests where the calorific content comes in under the agreed export, calorific content agreement. The very next day, there's another test for the exact same shipment where it's just above. And so, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. So that more people can come to science. You talk about STEM and you are not doing anything about the STEM. That is the problem. We've actually been really pushing the government on STEM and R&D investment. Why do you need to STEM? If there is not incentivized, why the youngsters will come? No, I understand what you're saying, and I think there's so much work to do, and I can just see how passionate you are about this, but it is something that, we're pushing the government on, and again, I think it's something where the community gets it. They want to see more investment, and incentives to get people into these areas which are clearly our future, and to pay them well, but also to invest in research and development. We see the huge spin-offs and the economic payback, and yet we're at the lowest rate of R&D to GDP on record. So there's just so much work to do in that space. But thank you for raising that. One more question, and then sorry, we're running a bit over. Last one up the back there.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to say what a wonderful breath of fresh air you've been in the ACT as far as politics goes, and Australia-wide. I mean, you put all our other politicians to shame. When I write you an email, I get a response that addresses the issues.
That's down to my team.
I'm trying to raise, and I write to emails to other politicians. I get a standard sort of party-type response. I mean, I think you independents have actually demonstrated something fantastic about politics, that it can work. And, you're unique in my experience of politics, and I've been, interested in it all my life. In my 70s. Can I ask just a couple of very brief sort of, I'm asked after comments really, but I was wondering about your reaction or response to the referendum and the sort of incarceration rates we have in the ACT. I think something like 25% of young people and older people in ACT prisons and so on are of Indigenous background. So that's one little question, and I'm wondering, I mean, that's a big issue for me across Australia, and I wondered your response to the referendum. And the other thing that nobody seems to have mentioned tonight is the whole business of AUKUS and the US alliance, which troubles me greatly. We seem to have signed up to ScoMo's policy, courtesy of the Labor government, without any public consultation, without any discussion really in Parliament, So I'll just leave it at that. And thanks very much for organising this evening.
No, thanks for coming along. And on your first sort of comments, thank you very much. That I really appreciate it, and thank you all for giving me the opportunity to do this. It honestly has been a huge. I don't know, I've loved representing a community I love on all these issues. In terms of emails, my team worked very hard on that, so I can't take any credit for that. Maybe a little bit. On The Voice, seeing the amount of I guess the decades of work and the years and years of work that many Indigenous leaders had put into that, and then I think seeing how much it meant to so many people in the Indigenous community, it was a really tough result. And I think what Selena said is spot on. People said no to this proposal, but I don't think that means reconciliation can't be dead, and we have to find a way to further these conversations. And so I think there's plenty of work to do that there, including in the ACT. We do have the highest Indigenous incarceration rate in the country, which we should be ashamed. It's something we have to sort out. We have to sort it out. We've got sky-high recidivism rates as well, and so clearly there's work to do in those programs. And again, there's amazing people working in this space. I visited an organisation called Worldview Foundation that are working with young Indigenous people. They started working with people coming out of prison. They're now doing most of their work working with people, keeping them out of prison, diversion, job opportunities, training them up. And so I think Canberrans want to see that happen. We need the territory government to step up there, and I think we need leadership from the federal government as to where next. What does this mean for us as a country now? AUKUS, I have concerns about what it means for our sovereignty, our sort of capability to defend ourselves. And you look at some of the instability in the US, their election coming up, their recent announcement about them scaling back their own submarine program. So I think there's questions about that. The other thing we've been engaging on is Pillar 2 of AUKUS, which is around research and development and how that will potentially impact Australian researchers in foreign students or researchers not being able to work on a whole range of things because the US is sort of creating this sort of friendshoring kind of barrier. There's a bunch of legislation that will come through the Parliament at some point, and we'll be engaging on it. But again, I think it's one of those issues that Scott Morrison cooked up, and Labor have kind of just run with it. So. At the moment it's bipartisan, but you've seen the crossbench raising concerns about some of the details and what this does mean for us.
I'm going to wrap the senator up so we can all go home. All of you included. Tuggeranong, that was the coolest, most interactive town hall that I reckon we've had in 2 years. So thank you so much for bringing it tonight. And I just want to dob David in because he does answer his own emails towards the end of... It's mine now. Towards the end of last year, we got behind and he spent days responding to everybody's emails, so he does do it. But thank you.
Thank you all so much. Really appreciate you coming out on a Wednesday night, and a quick round of applause to Tash for being the MC. Thank you. Have a great night. I will hang around for a bit and happy to answer questions. Thanks.